It's NFL draft combine time, and there are 4 Eagles there who are all trying to increase their stock for the NFL draft.
You are Locked On Boston College, your daily podcast on the Boston College Eagles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is Locked On Boston College, your team every day. I'm your host, AJ Black. I'm the editor of Eagle Insider, and I've been the host of this show for the last 5 years. Thank you all who have made us part of your daily routine, and we are the only daily Boston College podcast. So if you're looking for BC news, we're the place to go. On today's show, it's all NFL draft combine time, as we're going to talk about the 4 players from Boston College that are in the combine, what it could mean, and how they could help or hurt their stock. And to get into this, there's no better person to talk to than Mitchell Wolf of Eagle Insider. Mitch, how's it going?
It's going well. I'm excited to be back on the show talking about one of my favorite weekends of the year, where I sit around and watch a bunch of young men run around in tights, which, if you think about it, I guess is not very different from most of my weekends that involve watching football. But this time they're in an even greater state of undress, if you will. So that's totally normal behavior.
So everyone knows about like the 40 and the bench press, but what's the weirdest part of the NFL draft combine that interests you?
So I think most of the drills that they do are pretty useful. I think one of the more controversial ones is the gauntlet drill, which is the one where the receiver is kind of running down a yard line and catching balls on either side of him. And there's some debate as to whether this is a good or bad drill, because the receiver has to catch the ball running at full speed, which is good, but then he has to quickly discard it and then catch the next one while running. So there's some people saying, "Oh, this teaches bad technique with hands." It doesn't really tell us anything about that. But other people are like, "No, this teaches us how well does a guy track the ball while running," which I generally think it's a good drill. It's just one that's kind of controversial. The thing that I dislike the most about the combine is all the local media from every team that comes in and asks every prospect, "Have you met with the team that I cover?" Which, it's the NFL Combine. Every prospect there is going to meet with every team. And there's this great hoodie that this guy made that AJ has up if you're watching the YouTube that says, and he's at the Combine, says, "Have you talked to insert team I cover?" ? Which, in my opinion, if you get credentialed for this event, they should just give this to you in the swag bag, as and you just wear this to every media availability, because it's just it's a ridiculous question that everybody asks, and it just wastes so much time. And there are times when you watch these media availabilities and you learn very interesting things about the prospect, and none of the times is it interesting to say, "Yes, I have met with lists of list 32 teams." It's just dumb. So that's my least favorite part of the combine.
Yeah, so I mean, this morning, Donovan Ezeiruaku, who we're going to talk about first, he met with the media to talk, and I loved his comment. I know Andy Backstrom, who used to cover BC for Rivals, asked him about where things are at with Boston College, how he sees that. And Donovan comes across, he's a great interview. Like, he's just a smart guy. Let's talk a little bit about him. He's a potential first-round draft pick. What is it about him that you like? What are you looking for during the combine? And what can he prove to teams during this next week?
The thing about Donovan Ezeiruaku for this combine is I don't think he's necessarily going to be a player that blows up the combine, or that's not going to be his calling card. Donovan is excellent in terms of his technique, engaging with offensive linemen in a real game, not just running around. And he's a good athlete. He's not necessarily a great athlete. And I mean that specifically in regards to his explosiveness off the ball from a standstill point, and then his long straight line speed, which that's the 40-yard dash. Explosiveness off the ball, you could argue, is the short shuttle, a little bit of broad and vertical jump. So I'm not sure he's going to test. I don't think he's going to blow up the combine in those drills. I think that if he does the 3-cone, which a lot of prospects don't do anymore, because when earlier in the combine's history, that was a very telling metric for if players would be good, especially defensive linemen, because it shows how well you can change direction with your body, how well controlled you are, and how well you can move in a small space. And so then prospects stop doing it, because then it's like, oh, you leave it up to chance, or you kind of keep it in the ether. You don't necessarily do them yourself. And then you can do it at the pro day where you're better prepared and have all the variables in your favor, as opposed to the combine where you're in a new place, you're staying in a hotel, you're waking up early, you're going to this place, you're doing all this stuff, and you might not feel 100%. But I will say the combine has tried to change some things to make the drills a little easier for players to do, in terms of not having the drills go at like 11 o'clock at night, which was crazy for a bit of a time. So they're trying to make prospects do the drills more. Of course, we're seeing a lot of the top prospects still opt out of the actual drills. But returning to Ezeiruaku, I think that, again, the 3-cone I think will be big for him. We'll see about the jumps. The 10-yard split in the 40 will be very key, because that's another part of the explosiveness factor, which a lot of teams really care about. It's how, what do you got at stance? And watching Ezeiruaku's film back, is more explosive out of that 3-point stance, so maybe he will be better at that, because that's how you start the 40 from a sprinter stance, as if you're in track. And then I think the drills will be good for him. And again, they're only facing bags, but that's something he'll be, I think, very well prepared for, and something he can really excel in, because the best thing about Donovan Ezeiruaku is his hand technique, how deep his bag of pass rush moves is, because he just has all these kind of moves, and it's even more impressive to watch on tape, because you watch through the process of a game how he's setting up these moves to counter off each other and counter off what the offensive lineman does. And going back to this explosiveness thing and his get off from the snap, you kind of see early in the game, he's feeling out the opponent. Like, he's not just going to deploy these moves immediately to just hope they work. He's kind of taking it a little slow to like say, okay, how is this offensive lineman going to play me? And then later in the game, once he has a feel for it, he's just like, okay, I'm going to take a step here, then go this way, and then hit him with this hand move, because I think he's trying to do this, take this away from me. So he plays a very cerebral brand of football, which is not necessarily the best thing for the NFL Combine, but I imagine he's going to kill the interviews. He's been a leader for this team. His improvement as a player from year to year, even though we had a down year in terms of production in 2023, I think he can talk about how he came back from that to have the stellar year he did in 2024. He's been a captain. He's been in a bunch of different defenses, played a lot of different kinds of roles. And again, just like the way he plays the game, I think teams will really gravitate towards him, and I think that should help solidify him as a first-round pick in come late April.
Now, one thing I've asked you about, and I want to talk about it on the podcast, is one of the questions he was asked is, have you met with Green Bay? And Jeff Hafley, obviously his former coach, is the defensive coordinator. Now, we've talked about this. I've texted Mitch about it. Do you think Jeff Hafley is a good fit for him in the NFL, or do you think there's other teams that would be a better match for Ezeiruaku?
When I look down the list of NFL teams and think about how Donovan Ezeiruaku fits on each of their defenses in terms of their schematic fits, I don't really see it for Green Bay, because they're running traditional kind of 4-3 even front defense. And even front means you have 4 down defensive linemen, which is what, to be fair, that's what Hafley ran at BC. He did let Donovan stand up a little more in 2023, which at that point it's then you're technically running like a 3-4, but it's not. That's why we kind of talk more about even versus odd fronts that are more definitive as to what the defense is actually doing. But the defensive ends they're looking for with that team are much bigger players. You want them to be able to stop to set the edge against the run, to hold up against bigger offensive tackles. And frankly, that's another one of Donovan Ezeiruaku's weak points, and that's just because he's only 6'4", sub 250 pounds. He's great. He's very long arms, which is great. But the fact of the matter is, when you're playing NFL offensive tackles who are over 310 pounds and they also have 34 plus inch arms, that's going to lead to some problems. So I just don't really see the fit there. I think he's much better in a 3-4 odd front scheme where he can be an outside linebacker. You can rush him from a 3-point stance at times still, but you get him a little further outside. You're not asking him to set the edge against the run against offensive tackles, get him more against tight ends where he can really do some good work. Excuse me. And then obviously, every team runs nickel more than they do base these days. So that's where he can really turn him loose as a pass rusher. And I think that's where he will start his career as kind of a third down pass rush specialist. And then as he develops and gets used to the speed and the strength of the NFL game, then he'll be able to become more of an every down player.
So when you're saying Green Bay, like a guy like Shamar Stewart, the guy from Texas A&M, is that more like an edge that they'd be looking at?
I really like Shamar Stewart, 6'5", 280, and he's going to have some freakish testing because he's a crazy athlete for his size. So it's an interesting edge group. It's an interesting class of edge rushers because you have a guy like Abdul Carter, who's clear and away the number one guy, could be argued as the number one guy in the class. And then you have a bunch of these kind of smaller guys like Jalen Walker, who's another kind of linebacker edge hybrid. Mike Green from Marshall, who's kind of like Ezeiruaku in terms of his play style. He has some off the field questions. Obviously come from lesser competition. Then you've got like the big names from the big schools. You got Michael Williams from Georgia, Shamar Stewart from Texas A&M, James Pierce from Tennessee, Princely Umanmielen from Ole Miss. Like a lot of these guys who've been around college football a while had made big names at big schools. So, and and most of those guys are bigger, stronger defensive ends. James Pierce aside, he's kind of a weird, unique player. But it's a very deep edge class, and it'll be interesting. I think it'll just be interesting because I think every team will stack that and rank that group of edge rushers differently.
All right, in a moment, we're going to move to the offensive side of the ball. We're going to start looking at the offensive line and potentially the next pick to go when the NFL draft happens. We'll look at Ozzy Trapilo. We'll get into that in just a moment. Attention, Boston College fans. The future of college sports is here and it's transparent. Before the Roy app, NIL negotiations often happened under the table and fans didn't have a clear way to support the athletes they love. Now with Roy, you get to be part of the change and support Boston College athletes in the most transparent way possible. Roy, the NFL app, allows you to choose the players you want to support, decide how much you want to contribute, and receive exclusive content from the athletes you back. The best part, if your player transfers, you get your money back. It's a risk-free way to show your support. The Roy app is giving fans control, no more uncertainty. Now you can provide transparent, impactful support and help shape the team and the future of college sports with your contributions. Download the Roy app now from the App Store and start backing Boston College athletes the way they deserve with transparency, trust, and a real impact. This is the future of college sports. Join it now by downloading Roy and supporting your favorite player. Welcome back. This is Locked On Boston College. AJ Black here, joined by Mitchell Wolf, and we're talking about the NFL Combine. If you're a draft freak and just love this stuff, this is a big week for you, just like Mitch has. Mitch is our draft freak right here. I go to him with all the questions because some of the stuff I'm like, I have no clue. I can watch the 40 and understand that and bench presses and things like that, but there's some of this stuff and I'm just like, is the intelligence test gone now? I know that they kind of. Yeah.
I think they still do it actually. Which is always funny because then like the results are not supposed to be released, but they always get leaked.
Who was it, Manziel that tanked that one?
That's not the one that I remember is Frank Gore getting like a 4. Which basically, which like functionally means you're illiterate. And then he went on to be like a top, like he has like the 5th most rushing yards in NFL history. So it's proof. It's like, this actually it was funny in high school. I once did a stats project on whether the Wonderlic score indicated future success for quarterbacks, and there was no correlation.
Yeah, I swear I've seen more guys opting out of it. A lot of,
There's also a bunch of like there's so much like psychological testing otherwise with all kinds of different things. Like so that Wonderlic is kind of just, it was kind of the thing because you could go take it and like, oh, like now I know what it means, or I know how I compare to NFL players. But yeah, there's so much other testing. Like there was that thing with the S2 cognition test a few years ago that Bryce Young was apparently awesome at and CJ Stroud sucked at, and then the first year they were inverted of those results. Then the next year they kind of came back to each other. So it's, there's always a lot of testing. They always are trying stuff out. So, that's stuff that, we don't really get from the public until well after the combine. So I don't really pay as much attention to that.
All right. So let's go into our next guy. That's Ozzy Trapillo, a, offensive lineman, offensive tackle for BC. Where are things at with him right now? The arm length, that was a big thing, right?
Yeah, so I know this is going to sound silly, but so Ozzy Trapillo at 6'7" came in at the Senior Bowl with, I want to say his arms were 33 5/8 inches, which is fine. It's just kind of surprising given that he's 6'7" and change, and especially that his arms are shorter than Donovan Ezeiruaku, who's half a foot shorter than him. So, and again, this is why like people will care more. I would say the NFL teams care more about arm length than they do height for offensive linemen. Generally, though, that height is generally linked to arm length. So like there's another offensive tackle in this class, Armand Membu, who played for Missouri, played against BC this year, and he's 6'3" and change, but he has like 34, maybe even 35 inch arms, which is just it's an outlier. But it's like, hey, this guy can play tackle really well, and it doesn't matter that he's 6'3". So with Trapillo, it's kind of weird because he does have these relatively shorter arms. But being 6'7", you kind of have to play tackle because when you're 6'7", you don't want to play guard because then if you have a shorter quarterback, then they're going to have trouble seeing over you. So, and there was an interview I read of him on the Draft Network with, I believe it was Justin Mello or Ryan Fowler, one of their two guys. I can't remember which one. I'm sorry, but they interviewed him and talked to him about a lot of stuff in his prep, and he says, "Yeah, I see myself as a tackle only, because of my height," which is kind of a rarity in this class of offensive linemen because, excuse me, even the guys that are in the top that are going to go in the first round, your Will Campbell, Membu, like I mentioned, Kelvin Banks from Texas, all of them are like, it's like, oh, like they could kick inside to guard. All these guys are like, oh, we'll kick him inside and they'll be better. Trapillo is a tackle, and he's played both tackle spots, which is good. Hasn't played left tackle in a while, but he has played it before. And watching him, it is kind of it is similar to Ezeiruaku, where he's not the best athlete. He's not like crazy strong, but he's pretty much good across the board. Got really good technique. Really has an innate feel and understanding of who he needs to block, when and where he needs to block them and how to get there. And you see him. It's cool watching it because you can see how the run game is almost oriented to go behind him, and they give him these tough assignments where he has to block two different players on a lot of plays, and a lot of other guys they don't do that for, just because it's hard. But he's consistently doing that. He's dominating the run game. There's just some, because he's so tall, it's sometimes tough for him to get as low as he needs to, because as the saying goes, low man wins. The lower you are, the better leverage you have to displace your opponent. And when you're 6'7" and he's tall, he's a bit stiff, so it's hard for him to get down and get under some guys. So that leads to some issues, and the length can compound that sometimes. None of that really matters for the drills, obviously, but I think he should have a pretty decent day. Again, I think he's a good, perhaps not great athlete, but long strides, should be able to do pretty decent in the 40. I think it'll be interesting to see what he does in like the 3 cone and the shuttle, because I think it kind of goes both ways with the tall guys, because like, okay, you have long strides, but it might be hard for you to turn. But I've always felt Ozzy has pretty good balance for as tall of a guy he is. Whenever he's been knocked down, it's usually because somebody from behind like cuts out his knees or something. So it's not like he's like flopping all around. It's just kind of that happens in offensive line when you get cut down from behind. I think if he does the bench press, that'll be interesting, because the bench press you actually want shorter arms for, because then you can rep out more reps because you don't have to extend your arms as far. Now, again, like I think teams would prefer you have longer arms. They don't care what you actually do in the bench press, but that's more of a work ethic kind of a drill where it's like, okay, did you prepare for this? Did you take this seriously? Because and usually if guys don't, they just won't do it. But usually if you guys see a guy do all the drills, it's like, okay, this guy like really prepared for this. He cares about this. And like I said with Ezeiruaku, Ozzy's the same way. And there was an interview. In that interview, he talks a lot about his work ethic, his preparation for this. There was an article that came out about him and Drew Kendall working with Dante Scarnecchia, the former New England Patriots offensive line coach, who's arguably one of the best offensive line coaches in NFL history. And working with him is huge. So I think teams are also going to really gravitate towards him because of his intelligence, understanding of the game, leadership, all that kind of stuff. And ability to, this is something that, and we'll talk about this with Kendall too. These guys have played in a bunch of different offensive schemes. He's played multiple positions. He's been asked to do a ton of different stuff. I think teams are going to really appreciate that about him and how he approaches preparing for the game and how he plays it.
Now, I know you're not a Pats fan, but obviously Mike Vrabel, his son, played with Ozzy.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that I've seen a lot of articles about the O'Brien to Vrabel connection, which it's just talk, but I do think there may be some smoke to this, like that maybe BC. I mean, the Pats, who have an absolutely dog poop offensive line.
I mean, I've said to my friends who's a Patriots fan, I've said, if the Patriots used every single pick in this draft on offensive and defensive line, I'd be fine with that. Like that would not be a problem. Given that, the future of David Andrews is kind of questionable. So you've got some questions on the interior, maybe then you can bump Mike and Onwenu back inside, see what you want to do with Cole Strange, if he's going to be a guard or center. But, even though they drafted Caden Wallace, and I don't know if they drafted another offensive tackle last year, but they still need a lot of help there. So, I think Ozzy that'd be very helpful for them. I think he's a fit for, I'll say this, it's hard to find a scheme where I'm like, okay, this doesn't work at all for him. Like, he's just a pretty good, well-rounded offensive tackle that doesn't have like many gaping flaws. It's just a matter of like which scheme can maximize him to being, make a few Pro Bowls, or there might be ones where it's like, hey, this guy's just an adequate starter.
So let's continue on the offensive line talk. I have it down as the third segment, but that's just kind of the running show notes. Let's talk about Drew Kendall. You have been watching his film, and you were telling me, that to 23 to 24, there was quite a bit of growth in him. What have you seen? And more importantly, not a knock on Alec Lindstrom, but what makes him different than Alec Lindstrom, who just kind of fell off the face of the earth? Not face of the earth. He just was never drafted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Kendall is. I think the thing with sorry, I'll restart this. I think the thing with Lindstrom is that you can cut this pause out. Ideally, I'm having trouble thinking of an answer.
It's okay.
I think there are definitely more similarities between Alec Lindstrom and Drew Kendall. Like they're both relatively, they've grown from being very small centers, very undersized players, to being adequately sized. With Kendall, he has adequate size. It checks the boxes, but not his length and weight are not necessarily going to be advantages over opponents. I think Kendall is there. There's definitely just an extra level of mental processing and knowing what's going to happen. He's been in charge of making the line calls for the last 2 years, setting and changing the protections. And you see it how he anticipates in pass protection. He was elite in pass protection this last year, despite having some questionable guards around him. He was very good in 23 as well, but he had 2 better guards around him, so that was very helpful to him. But this year, fantastic, cut down a lot of the penalties, is a real fighter, and not dirty by any means, but he is fighting to finish every single rep. He's not necessarily like dominating his opponent or even winning, but he's not losing, and he knows how to, as the phrase goes, die slowly in pass protection. Like he'll get popped off the line, but he'll reset that anchor after 2 or 3 steps and shut it down. So that's very good to see. I think with Lindstrom, he was just too small and still just didn't have enough play strength to cut it in the NFL. And frankly, play strength is an issue with Kendall as well. Again, you don't see him dominating and moving opponents off the ball unless he is part of a combo or double team block where he's getting help from a guard. So I think with him, he's just a little more scheme specific to a zone style rushing scheme where you don't have to, go head up against a defensive tackle and move them out of the way. You can kind of angle towards them. And he is much better in angle blocks when he can get a step or two in the direction of the defensive lineman and then use that as part of his attack. And he's an elite puller. Well, I'll say very good. I won't say elite. He's a very good puller, knows how to get out in space, knows how to locate an opponent in space and get there and block them. So it is a pretty close comp. And again, I don't think Drew Kendall's going to go super highly, even though this is a weak center class. I have him as an early day 3 pick. So round 4, round 5. And again, I think teams are going to be impressed by the way he prepares, the way he understands the game, the fact that he's been the center in every year he's been at BC, it's been a different offensive coordinator. So he's had to learn a ton of different systems, had to operate in a bunch of different types of offenses. He obviously really struggled in 2022, but came back, got better in 2023, and then got even significantly better in 2024. And he was the first team All-ACC center, and he absolutely deserved it. Really strong film throughout the entire year. And, again, I don't think he's going to be a world beater. I think he's kind of scheme specific, but I think he can, by the end of his rookie contract, especially if he gets to a team that has a good strength and conditioning staff that can add some weight, add some muscle, I think he can be an adequate starter by the end of his rookie contract.
All right. In our final segment, Mitch and I are going to talk about Cam Horsley. I feel like he's one player of the 4 that we have really not talked a lot about, but could have some really interesting, excuse me, has some interesting combine film to watch for. So we'll get into that in just a moment. Life moves fast, especially when you have a family. One day you're watching your kids take their first steps, and before you know it, they're off to college. That's why securing their future is so important. Fabric by Gerber Life makes it simple to get term life insurance that fits your family's needs. With Fabric, you can apply for term life insurance online right from your couch. You could be covered in under 10 minutes. In many cases, no health exam is required. With peace of mind as a parent, I want to make sure my family is financially protected no matter what happens, and Fabric gives me that peace of mind. So join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their families. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/lockedoncollege. That's meetfabric.com/lockedoncollege. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Assurance Company, not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions. This is Locked On Boston College. AJ Black here, joined by Mitchell Wolf. And we're talking about the NFL Draft Combine. But I was just talking about kids. I was sitting at my son's karate practice today, and I was on my phone and I was tweeting, and my kids get on me for that all the time. And my daughter, who's 3, looked at my phone and goes, "You're talking about BC College, aren't you, Dada?" And I said, "Yep." She goes, "I know a BC player, Thomas Castellanos." And I go, "My God, I gotta get them somebody else because that's all they talk about." I hid the shirts. The shirts are gone, the jersey that they have. But the only player, I mean, Miles, my older son, met Ozzy, Donovan. He's met all of these guys that we're talking about, but all he talks about is
you gotta hope for one of them to be a Patriot.
yeah.
You
Ozzy was the
got
one.
yeah.
Ozzy's the one that had his little hand in his giant mitt, and Miles was just like, "Whoa!" But yeah. Anyways, it was just one of those moments again as a dad, as I was just saying in that spot right there. Now let's talk about Cam Horsley. I've seen some scouts out there talking about his strength. Now at the combine, this is going to be an opportunity for him to really show off. What do you see about Cam Horsley and kind of, he's not one we're talking about a lot. It's usually the first 3. What could he do in this combine to really put his name out there?
He's got to dominate the bench press because as much as I've talked about how deep this defensive end or edge rusher class is, defensive tackle is arguably just as deep, if not deeper. A lot of good players, a lot of different body types, a lot of guys that play like Cam Horsley and that they're a nose tackle, run stuffer, don't offer a ton of pass rush, but they will clog up the run, clog up the A gaps, and be very solid there. And that's what Horsley's done the last few years. He's been an excellent nose tackle, was fantastic this year. Didn't really offer much as a pass rusher. So that is concerning, especially in a league that is still more pass heavy. You do want your defensive tackles to have that ability. And if they don't, they're not going to be as highly valued in the draft. Or if they're at least if they're a one dimensional defensive tackle, they're not going to be valued as highly. But I think the encouraging thing for Horsley is that when he's at the East West Shrine game, he looked a lot quicker, a lot more explosive. Actually had some pass rush juice, had a quarterback hit, should have been a sack, and he looked like a completely different player. So I'm wondering if he could kind of surprise some people at the combine with, I think he might have dropped some weight, so maybe he can be a little faster. And if he can put up some really good numbers in the 40, in the agility drills, in the jumps, then it's like, oh, okay, maybe we can, I still have him as probably like a mid day 3 pick. Just again, because the tape is just run stuffing, not a lot of pass rush. But if he can show this at the combine, it's like, okay, no, like now that I'm, not playing in a specific type of defense where I'm being asked to be the nose tackle, I can be a more well-rounded player. Like, okay, maybe we can spend an earlier draft pick on this guy and we can develop him into a, every down player, or at least one that we don't have to take off the field on certain downs and distances, because there are a few of those guys in this class. You look at a guy, he'll probably be around the same range as Horsley is. Desmond Watson, that nose tackle from Florida, who I think is listed at 464 pounds and is just an absolute tank. There's another one from Florida, actually, Cam Jackson, I think he's 6'6", 274. And 374. So there are those nose tackles, but then the other side of the coin is you get these undersized defensive tackles. TJ Sanders from South Carolina. I think it was, now I'm forgetting them. Tonka Hemingway, another South Carolina one, is kind of that way. Also, just fantastic name for him. But then again, more nose tackles. Nash Huttenmacher, who BC played in Pinstripe Bowl, the nose tackle from Nebraska, big nose tackle kind of guy. So Horsley needs to kind of show that he can be a well-rounded player by showing some good numbers. And if he doesn't, it's like, okay, it's not the end of the world. I don't think he'll tank the combine by any means. I think he's, he'll be solid. Might not go crazy, but if he can do better than expected, it's okay. Maybe this guy can be somebody we can take in the late rounds and be a valuable contributor, at least as a rotational player during his rookie year.
So I'm looking forward to this, to hear more, because there's 4 guys. Obviously, the top 2, at Trapillo and Ezeiruaku, we're going to see where they're going to fall in those first couple rounds. The other 2, we'll have to wait and see what happens. But I think the combine is going to be a big factor in this, and obviously pro day, when that happens, is going to be something that we're going to be talking about.
I also didn't really say this earlier because we kind of I got talking about him as a prospect, but I think Kendall should generally do pretty well across the board in these drills. Maybe not the bench press, because again, I think his strength is not necessarily a strong suit, but agility, running, all that stuff should look good in the drills. I think he should look great in the drills, because a lot of those are like pulling based. So getting him out in space where he can, run around a bit, that'll be something where he can really excel. So I think Kendall could gain the most. I think Obviously, Ezeiruaku is the most to lose, given that he's the highest ranked of these players. But I also think there's a decent chance it's like, okay, this may not be the event for him, but I think teams that are smart and just focus on the tape, they'll know it's like, okay, no, we know this guy's a good football player. The underwear Olympics are not going to change our opinion on this guy.
Underwear Olympics, love it. All right, so let's wrap things up. Mitch, where can people find your work?
You can find me at Mitchell T. Wolf, WOLFE on Twitter. Check out my work in Eagle Insider. We'll be having a I don't know exactly what to call it, but like a review of Grayson James's performance in the 2024 season. And then next few weeks, I'll be putting out my scouting reports on these 4 players. I would like to see if I can get to some of the other guys that are going to be going in the draft. I want to see if I can get to Cam Arnold, because I also think it'd be cool to review his tape from this year. He only played in 7 games. Excuse me. He was playing really well before his injury, so he'd be something cool to look at. So just make sure you keep an eye on Eagle Insider. We got a lot of cool stuff on there.
Yeah, and I've been covering recruiting. It's been a big day. If you're into recruiting news, the official visit season, the offers are starting. They're getting locked in with their recruits, as I mentioned on yesterday's show. And there's been some names that I didn't even know were coming up. Like, I'm going to put this one up there. I sort of call him Carlos Santana Carlos. So for all you dads out there,
smooth route runner.
Yeah, he's got some black magic in his step. This is this is just one, and there's many out there that we've got covered. We're talking about that, and I'll talk more about this on the show later this week with guys that have kind of gone out there and already announced. I'll also talk about BC's game against Stanford, which sounds like it's a real bore right now. Well, we're recording in the middle of this, so I'm not going to stay up and watch that, and everything else going on. So thank you all who have made Locked On Boston College your first listen every day. Thank you all who's subscribed to us on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll see you all again tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Boston College, your team every day.